Democrats. Get lost, says Christie, who is stomping on his own constituents. Also from the Daily News today, for thousands of low-paid airport workers in New York, help is on the way. The directive covers 8,000 workers at Kennedy and LaGuardia airports, but it does not cover 4,000 employees in Newark, New Jersey. And why is that again? They are not going to let you forget. It is because of drop-dead Chris Christie. No wonder the president's joking about chocolate chip cookies and sofas and snorkel kits, right? All but clicking his heels when he talks about the minimum wage now. Because the White House and the Democrats, they have figured out a way to make this fight not about Barack Obama versus John Boehner. They have figured out a way to make this everybody who wants a raise versus every Republican politician who says no everywhere in the country. In New Jersey, famously, the night that Chris Christie was reelected this past November, New Jersey voters voted on that same ballot to override Governor Christie's veto of a bill that would have raised the statewide minimum wage in New Jersey. Everybody says, oh, Chris Christie won re-election by such a huge margin. He won by 22 points. You know what? Same margin by which he was overruled by the voters of his state on that minimum wage issue. People like raising the minimum wage. People like raising the minimum wage almost more than they like any politician in the whole country. And now, as the blessed Port Authority makes news for something other than purposely ruining the first week of school for thousands of Fort Lee, New Jersey school children on orders from Chris Christie's office, this minimum wage issue is becoming a big deal, both in New Jersey politics and around the country. Now the president has framed it as a decision not just for Congress, but for every governor, every mayor, every agency head. Expect everybody who has that decision to make in the country. Now that that's happened, expect them all to be consulting the polling on this issue, which happens to look like this. This is the most recent national polling on the popularity of raising the minimum wage. It is popular across the country. It is popular among Democrats. It is popular among independents. It is even popular among Republicans. But more directly, look at what this issue looks like when people actually go out to vote on it. Statewide in Florida, raising the minimum wage won by 42 points. In 2006, Missouri was one of several states that voted on it statewide. In Missouri, its margin of victory was 52 points. It did not get 52% of the vote. It won by 52 points. 76% of people in Missouri voted to raise the minimum wage. Clear enough statement? Statewide in Nevada, it won by 38 points. Statewide in Arizona, it won by 32 points. Statewide in Montana, it won by 46 points. A 46-point margin of victory for raising the minimum wage. Statewide in Ohio that same year, it won by 12 points. And of course, in New Jersey, in November, it won by 22 points, while they were putting Chris Christie back in office. Whenever you put raising the minimum wage on the ballot, whenever you give people a choice about whether or not they want to raise the minimum wage, the answer is yes, they want to raise the minimum wage. And that makes Democrats who support raising the minimum wage happy for a number of reasons. Number one, if you want people at the lower end of the wage scale to get paid more money, just the raw impact of the policy is a positive thing. Politically, though, people voting for the minimum wage, it tends to also encourage them to vote for candidates who support raising the minimum wage. So in 2006, when Missouri was voting to raise the minimum wage and they were voting for it by a 52-point margin, they also voted into office Claire McCaskill, a Democrat, to replace an incumbent, relatively popular Republican senator. He wouldn't say what he thought about the minimum wage for most of the campaign, and she was very much in favor of it. People liked the minimum wage, so they liked her, and now she's the very popular senator from Missouri. That same year, John Tester was on the ballot in Montana. He was outspoken in favor of raising the minimum wage. Montana voters liked raising the minimum wage by a 46-point margin, and yes, they liked John Tester. He beat an incumbent Republican U.S. senator on that same ballot. In Ohio, that same year, conservatives fought like heck to kill the raise the minimum wage ballot initiative in Ohio, but it still won by double digits. And so did Ohio's brand new Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown. And that's part of why a year like that in 2006 was such a good year for Democrats. But even in a really bad year for Democrats, like, say, the worst possible year for Democrats, like 2010, the first Obama midterm, where the Republicans just ran the table. They won everything. You know where they did not win that year, where they won everywhere else, but they did not win in West Virginia.
Should there be minimum wage or not?
Absolutely not, because minimum wage is something that Franklin Delano Roosevelt put in during the Depression. It didn't work during the Depression. It certainly hasn't worked now.
John Racy, Republican candidate for Senate in West Virginia in that very Republican year of 2010, explaining to CNN that he does not believe in the minimum wage. He did not win. Republicans also did not win that year in the state of Connecticut.
Businesses are struggling, as you all described. Should you argue for reducing the minimum wage?
Well, I think, we've got minimum wages in states, we've got minimum wages in the government, and I think we ought to look at all of those issues in terms of what mandates are being placed on businesses and can they afford them.
Senate candidate Linda McMahon, in her very well-funded Senate candidacy, describing the minimum wage as a potentially unaffordable mandate for businesses that we maybe ought to look into getting rid of. Linda McMahon did not win. Up in Alaska that same year, Tea Party Republican Joe Miller came very close to unseating centrist Republican Lisa Murkowski. But this, unfortunately for Joe Miller, was part of his pitch. This is part of why he said he should win.
Should the federal government be requiring a minimum wage?
That is clearly up to the states.
So there should not be a federal minimum wage?
There should not be. That is not within the scope of the powers that are given to the federal government.
That was Joe Miller, not a senator then and not a senator after that election. Well, now, in 2014, it's time for our next midterm year. And Democrats and the president have succeeded in making the minimum wage an issue that is not just bottlenecked between the president and House Republicans in Washington. It is everywhere, including today becoming the latest headache for Chris Christie and the Port Authority in New York and New Jersey. The person Chris Christie had to put in to replace the guy who got fired in the bridge scandal, Bill Baroni, the first thing Bill Baroni's replacement at the Port Authority had to get done was get a huge, horrible round of press for what the Daily News is calling her mealy-mouthed statement, excusing New Jersey's decision not to raise the minimum wage when all the other airport workers across the bridges and across the tunnels in New York are getting a raise. Doesn't look good when you do this at the local level. It doesn't look good when you do this at the federal level. And between now and November and beyond, Democrats are going to try to play the popularity of this issue into not just their political benefit, but into a political headache for any Republican anywhere who finds themselves having to explain, a la John Racy in West Virginia and Joe Miller in Alaska, what it is exactly they do not like about paying people enough to live on. Pollsters are already looking at the most high-profile Senate race of this midterm year and how the minimum wage may factor into that race. The highest-profile Senate race this year is Mitch McConnell's re-election race in Kentucky. A new poll out today aims to show just how badly the minimum wage issue may factor into that race. The other senator from Kentucky, Rand Paul, today tied himself into a bow tie with a pretzel on top, trying to gymnastically evade questions about his own views on minimum wage in an interview on CNN.
He announced on increasing the minimum wage that federal contractors would get an increase immediately to $10.10 an hour, which is not, a huge amount of money by any means, but it's a little bit more than the current minimum wage. Are you with him on that?
Right. If you increase the price of something, you'll get less of it. So all of the studies, virtually all of the studies show that if you increase the minimum wage, you get higher unemployment, particularly teenage unemployment, particularly black teenagers.
Do you believe in a minimum wage?
Well, I think that when you look at raising it, all of the studies show that if you raise it, you get more unemployment. So really the marketplace does a better job at determining what this should be.
So there shouldn't be any federal minimum wage?
I'm not so sure I'm saying that, but I think what I'm not sure I have an answer as far as whether there is a right or wrong.
United States Senator, you've thought about whether or not there should be a federal.
I haven't thought about it. I'm not sure I'm saying that. I'm definitely sure I don't have an answer. Is it okay if I say I've never thought about this before? The minimum wage has suddenly become one of the year's more challenging questions. And if history is any guide, that question comes with big, big political consequences. No wonder the president seems so happy. Hold that thought. More ahead.